kind of understand how it functions and what's going on here. How many of you guys have shot a 92 series gun in the past?
Did you say 92?
92, yeah, Beretta, okay, all right. The 92 series is a very common platform, and they're very similar from platform to platform. This is an FS version of the gun. The F being the safety lever, and the S being the slide safety that comes in here. It's a notch, so even if the slide was cut in half, the slide can't come off the back of the gun. There's basically an oversized hammer pin that corresponds with the groove that's cut in the slide, so you could cut the front of the slide off of this gun, chamber around and fire it. It wouldn't hurt you. Okay, makes sense. The FS is unique in that when you decock the gun, what happens is there is a cylinder safety in here. When it rotates, the firing pin striker actually rotates up and out of the way. All right, when it does that, it internally releases the sear and drops the hammer on the back of the slide. So there's two safeties there that prevent the gun from firing. The first one is the fact that the firing pin striker comes out of the way, so it only hits the back of the slide and not the firing pin anyway. On top of that, internally, the firing pin block is still in place. So when you pull the trigger on a 92, you prep the trigger. Basically, if you see that lever come up, that pushes the firing pin block out of the way. So when you decock the gun, that firing pin block is still engaged. So not only is the firing pin block in place, but the firing pin is being rotated out of the way. So it's a very safe decocking mechanism. The other thing that it does is it disengages the trigger. What it basically does internally is it pushes down on the trigger bar right here. There's a pin that comes down, pushes the trigger bar down. What that does is it disengages so that the trigger doesn't even connect with the double action notch on the hammer. Okay, so it's a trigger deactivating safety. I recommend on the 92F series guns, I recommend carrying the gun off safe. So if you just think of it like a revolver with a double action trigger pull, there's not a safety on a revolver. It's not like a Glock, because a Glock, the gun's 2/3 of the way striped, right, cocked, and it's a single action gun basically. So yeah, there's no safety on it, but I've got a 1 inch long trigger travel. The Glock does not. It has a very short trigger travel. So it's the length of trigger travel that keeps you out of trouble, not the weight of trigger travel. All right. We'll discuss that a little bit more later. So what I recommend when you load the gun, you decock it, it comes on safe and back off safe. Holster it with your thumb on the back of the hammer. When you holster with your gun on the back of your thumb on the back of the hammer, you're ensuring that you know the condition of the gun when you holster it, meaning you're not going to holster it with the hammer cocked, because as soon as you put your thumb back there, you're going to be like, this doesn't feel right. Number two is if anything gets into the trigger mechanism, i.e. piece of clothing, a zipper tab, your finger, any of those kind of things, if your thumb's on the back of this hammer, you're going to know something's wrong. All right, it's going to start to retract, or in the case of your finger, if you're pushing on the hammer, you probably would break your finger before you would cock and fire the gun, right? Because you got a significant amount of negative mechanical leverage there. Make sense? Okay. Internally, just explain a couple of things for you guys. This is the decocking lever right here, this piece right here, internal. So when you push that, when you rotate the safety lever, it actually pushes that down and releases the hammer. It actually cams the sear out of the way and it causes the hammer to drop. This is the firing pin block lever. It is activated by the trigger bar. When the trigger bar comes forward, it lifts that lever up and pushes it out of the way. The firing pin block on Berettas is fairly unique compared to a lot of other manufacturers, in that the firing pin block is actually accessible, if you will, by both sides. It only will come out in one direction, but it's not a captured firing pin block. A lot of guns have a captured firing pin block where it's a blind hole. If it gets full of crap and debris and stuff like that, you have to remove it from the gun in order to clean it. The way the Beretta design is, it was designed to be a service pistol. I can clean this gun, I can put in some solvent, scrub it down, blow it out with an air hose. You'll see all the gunk and crap coming out that comes out of the firing pin channel. All guns get stuff in the firing pin channel, unburned powder, pieces of brass, stuff of that nature, burned carbon. It's always a good idea to be able to blow that stuff out of there. And if you cannot get that if you have to disassemble the gun to do that, obviously it creates significant problems. The other thing about the 92 series gun that tends to make it two things on my mind. One is inherently accurate, and two is very reliable. It has a almost a direct feed system. So if you look, when this barrel is to the rear in the unlocked position, when the slide starts going forward to feed that round, the round almost has to not move at all to move up and chamber into the round. And because the barrel is not tilting away during that process, it makes for a very reliable system. It's also not tilting down away from the extractor when the gun is unlocking. It basically, a piece of brass has to come straight out of the chamber to be ejected, instead of that barrel tilting down and away from the extractor in the opposite direction that you're now trying to get the piece of brass to go. Everybody tracking on what I'm talking about there? So that direct feed system makes for a very inherently reliable system. The other thing that it does is this barrel doesn't tilt. Basically, it's locked in by the slide. It just goes back and forth. A John Browning system, which is not a bad system, it's just a different one, that barrel tilts up and down, and that can make it lock, can cause the gun to lock up inconsistently, and that's where you'll see a lot of vertical straining sometimes on John Browning systems. So for a service pistol, this tends to be an extremely accurate system. Any questions about that? All right. Back together. Now, let's talk a little bit about kind of loading and unloading procedures, if you will. I'm going to use my pistol for that. I'm going to step right over here.